Thank you all for virtually being here with me. I'm going to begin with a video version of my thesis statement that was actually done before I did the installation. So don't worry about trying to see the artwork in the video. It's not, well, some of the artwork that's in the installation is in the video, but there will be slides of the installation after the video in case you didn't preview it and just because. So I am going to start with my thesis statement video.
Warp and weft. Walking along the river is horizontal. Mind and spirit are vertical. At any given moment, I am where the two cross. The farm where my family lived for generations has 8 water sources that flow into the Delaware River. I walk along that river day in and day out. There is no illusion of unspoiled nature. The sidewalk is perilously close to the roadway. I can feel the force of the wind from cars and trucks as they fly by. The factories on the New Jersey side of the river are both visible and audible. There will never be silence. The sound of car engines and birds cannot be separated. Walking, art making, living, I know all I do are tactics. My art makes a path among cliffs and buildings. I can't move the cliff or the building, but I can chart my own path. Bricolage. I am fascinated by the challenge of making do. It's a resistance against the holy scripture of consumer culture. Marla has given me woad, weld, and matter from her garden. I give her my eggshells, yarn that I dyed and spun, thanks to Dottie and Dee Dee the sheep. A garden is a good metaphor for my art process. It's a matter of tending. My intentions partner with chance operations. I put my colors in a book, in a box. The dye pot is 1 part laundry, 1 part cooking, and another part painting. Practice makes for beautiful imperfections. A space is set apart. Walking along the river is life, the horizontal, the lifeline. It seems circular as the seasons rotate endlessly, and I walk back and forth, yet it is inexorably linear. Digital disruption. We see as though through a plastic shower curtain. The river ends somewhere, as will I. The vertical rises from the earth. Weaving and painting are mostly on the vertical axis. They compose color, but the vertical is dynamic. It doesn't work without tension between the poles. Installation is a crossing tower. I walk because I still can.
Bear with me for a moment while I pull up the slides. When we pruned some very overgrown trees in the spring, I saw that the quote unquote yard waste was an armature for my weavings and warp weighted loom. I walked into the gallery with loads of branches, but had a sense that I didn't have enough of them. I got permission to harvest bamboo from the bank of the Delaware River, where I frequently walk. There were pedestals all over the gallery from a previous show. On the first day of install, I pushed the pedestals under the balcony, an area I call the grotto. I took out the compass on my phone and aligned the pedestals so that their sides corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions. I liked the idea of rotating the pedestals within the gallery space to correspond with the conceptual 4 corners of the world outside of the gallery. Women's work, the first 20,000 years, got me thinking about vertical work-weighted looms. They took up much less space than horizontal looms and could be dismantled when not in use. Throughout thousands of years of usage, they were associated with the work of women in their homes as opposed to professionals in workshops or later factories. To be honest, I could have simply used rocks for loom weights, but I was drawn to working in clay, earth. The fact that I had access to clay, which had been dug from the garden at the college where I teach, was just irresistible. The warp-weighted loom was my inspiration for the way the artwork interacts with its armature and the marvelous peculiarities of the gallery. I didn't want my work flush to the wall. Neither the paintings nor the weavings are very flat or fixed necessarily in one rigid configuration. Much of the installation is like a house of cards, just relying on gravity. I made use of the grooves in the concrete to anchor branches in all sections and levels of the gallery. I considered it a very good thing anytime, I considered it a very good thing anytime I found myself laughing out loud while I was installing the show. It was fun inventing ways to hang things using the features of the gallery, balance, weight, cord, loom weights. Many people assume at first that the paintings are actual weavings, and that's not just a Zoom thing. In person, people have the same confusion, which I find fascinating. Part of it may be that they're painted on reclaimed fabrics, in some cases, fabrics that are also used in the weavings. But the textures of the fabrics don't correspond to the weaving. The texture actually contradicts the depiction of a weaving. This view is directly at the back wall of the gallery. This is the same 2 weavings seen from the side, and of course, painting in the background. I hung 2 of the paintings from bamboo poles. For the other paintings, I settled on the idea of brackets that would supply 2 feet between the gallery walls and the end of the brackets. The mezzanine and balcony are striking features of the Madeline Powers Gallery. You get a bird's eye perspective of what's below, as well as the backs of paintings and the woods through the windows in the balcony. The campus is located 2 miles from the Delaware Water Gap. I see the space of the gallery as a specific space, not a neutral white box. I like visual puns, and well, I'm using cord all over the installation, so who's afraid of a tangle of cords? A hallmark of the Western hyper-consumer machinery is the one-way street pipeline that takes raw materials in, processes them into a very specific end product to be thrown away as quickly as possible. You know the term, planned obsolescence. Journal entry, August 15, 2020. The dyeing and spinning do more than process materials for later usage. They're meditations on place, time, where I am. It's mid-August, so as I drive, I look at the weeds on the side of the road, looking for goldenrod in bloom. Our culture turns the lights on when it's dark and ships strawberries from afar when it's winter. It does countless things to eradicate place, time, the seasons, our own internal biorhythms. In my art, I seek to reconnect broken connections. I'm very interested in cycles and our human relationships to them. This sheet was pretty obviously too worn out to use on my bed anymore. Already by the time this photo was taken, I had scoured, mordanted, and dyed the fabric with madder root. Marla has a dye garden for me in her backyard with woad, weld, and madder, plants that have been used as dye sources for thousands of years. The fabric of the torn sheet you saw 2 slides back was used in this 2019 installation at MICA. All the materials from that 2019 installation seen here deinstalled have gone on to other uses. In fact, all the cord used for the wash line in the previous slide are used in this exhibition as warp cord in the loom and to hang weavings and bind branches together. Much of the dyed fabric here has been over-dyed, become cord, yarn, and much of that has been woven or will be woven in the gallery on the warp-weighted loom. 24 of the small weavings in this show were woven on a pin loom made from the piece of wood that I used in that 2019 installation. The paintings are translations of the weavings, 2 weavings per painting. I spent more time mixing colors than painting the paint onto the fabric. I try to capture the weaving patterns, such as a 2-1 twill, plain weave, or diagonal looping. Once I mixed the colors, I didn't spend much time looking at the weavings for reference. This process of focus on color, pattern, and texture, composition was interestingly parallel to when I was painting, or to when I was weaving. For me, painting and weaving function the same way. It's just different materials. And even there's overlap. And I'm all for increasing that overlap as much as I can. For example, I'm going to make a lake pigment from my next exhausted matter dye bath. And I intend to make paint from the clay left over from making the loom weights. Colors and other properties of the fabrics I'm painting on, of course, interact with the paint on top of them. There's another layer of the interaction of color and texture in the paintings than in the weavings at this point. I've actually tried painting on weavings, but that was a less successful event so far. There's something interesting about the fabrics when they're just sewn together. But for me, at least, this is not as interesting as after I paint on them. In this slide is a close-up of the most recent of the 6 paintings in the show. I decided to see how little painting I could do and still have it read as a weaving. Since process and manipulation of materials is so important to me, I wanted to bring that into the gallery. I will be weaving the warp-weighted loom in the gallery over my lunch break and after work. The cord is free to simply slide through the loom weights. Once a section is woven, it can slide up towards and around the balcony rail and then down to the backside of the loom. The loom will be in use as long as the show is in the gallery. My imagination is already running ahead about what I can do with the approximately 25-foot long weaving that this show will generate. Things fall down. I used bows or slip knots to tie the cord so that when the show is over, they can easily be untied. Untie a couple of bows, give a little push here or there, and the show will come down like a handful of pickup sticks. I plan on filming it. Maybe it'll be interesting, maybe it won't. Each stage in the cycle of my work makes another step or iteration possible. Working in cycles, I treasure the journey and what it brings. So since this is a virtual exhibition, I'm not sure how good of a sense you got from those slides. And please feel free to address that or any other questions you might have. This picture, by the way, was during the install when I brought the paintings in a giant kind of a roll, and I just unrolled them and put them on the gallery floor, trying to figure out what I was going to do with them. In another iteration, they might be somewhere else, like draped over something more in the way that the weavings were in this particular exhibition.
Elizabeth has a question.
Great. Thank you.
Hey,
Elizabeth?
Cindy.
Hi.
This is amazing. And I'm so glad you have a space where you can really take over and spread this out. I wish I could see it in person. My question is about the element of water. And in the video that I watched and then rewatched now, we see a lot of the riverbank, and there's obviously a deep connection to the river, and then seeing the dye pots and seeing the element of water there. This is not a very fair question or well contained one, but I'm just curious how you think of your relationship to water and then the work's relationship to water. Maybe even most specifically about the waterway that's in the video and why that's important for us to see as a layer in the piece.
I was asked to sort of diagram what my concerns were. And, the first diagrams were looking like crazy things. There were a lot of tentacles. And I remember Janine Antoni said that the one word that stuck with me most of her advice was simplify. And so I was searching for some kind of construct that would be simple and yet allude to, contain, enable a whole lot of ideas, so that this sort of like, all over the place wackiness, I was looking for some kind of, sort of basic conception. And just in my own thinking, I started realizing I'm just really medieval in my thinking. I'm Christian, I thought of the cross, as the metaphor to go with. I thought of the four elements: earth, air, water, fire, and all of the the fours, earth, water, air, fire, north, east, south, west. And I also thought of, I trained with a Russian iconographer, Vladislav Andreev. And when he lectures on theory, he has this very, spelled out, vision of the cosmos in the shape of a cross with colors symbolizing, earth to heaven and all that sort of thing. So I guess that the walking along the river, when we went into lockdown for COVID, I started walking every day. And I just found myself sort of like magnetically pulled to the river, which is only a few blocks from where I live. And I was thinking, gee, that's like, my mom's family was from, where the source of the river is. And when I was a kid, I lived in Philadelphia and where it ends. And, I don't know, I just started thinking of the river representing like the lifeline, and like sort of the linear aspect of a life, as opposed to other aspects which might be like eternal and not so finite.
Thank you.
And Fabienne.
Hi, Cindy. Hi, everyone. I don't have a question, but I have several comments. First of which, I'm just extremely impressed and kind of moved by the changes in your work. I kept on remembering the very first year and what you were doing. But even from last year to this year, and I forget when we were still in person, but it was in the winter, and we had this conversation about paint on, I guess it was also sewn fabric, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
it wasn't, you hadn't painted, I believe, the weft and the warp. What had you painted?
It was on, you know, fabric, like, you know, worn out fabrics, basically. It was the view of my bed from my studio. So I was actually, I love the punning of that, okay, here I'm painting on sheets and fabric, and, you know, and I'm looking at, you know, sheets and fabric, and it just, I kind of, I don't know, I was amused by that.
Yeah, I remember that piece, although not in its details, and I remember the conversation also not too much in its details, but what is absolutely clear to me is how much better these paintings function, and how, like, from a kind of exploration of mixing these two processes, you've arrived at a way that it doesn't feel that they're like, they just come together in a way that I don't question as a viewer, but I also keep on pondering about the status of these pieces. Like, in between the object, in between the illusion, in between the literalness, in between the assemblage, just they're occupying a real interesting, fluid position for me. The other thing I wanted to talk about is how well I think you've been able to upend many conventions in the show. First of all, the convention of the exhibition space and the exhibition. I feel in the show you treat the gallery space as a loom, and then you weave a show, just as you have done that in your artist statement, the footage, you know, with the layering of the various footage kind of weaving themselves together, and your explanations, how you talk about the vertical and the horizontal axis, and then by way, I think, of many metaphors, you also suggest the third axis, the axis of time. So also appending the kind of documentation of work or artist statement conventions, and then kind of appending the conventions of painting, of course. So there's just really a lot that is done through these pieces and the way you talk about them. In addition to having just simplified that has allowed you to talk about more things when you simplified your process, or focused it a bit. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Oh, another third point I wanted to make was this thing that I don't think I had noticed in the same way before, but the clear trace of effort. And I mean effort not as strenuous effort, but just this very indexical quality of the pieces that seem to trace time through making, through effort. That's it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated your comments at that MLK, that last MLK. And yeah, I wasn't sure exactly where to go after that. But when I said, well, I don't want to paint. Well, anyway, when I started working on these paintings, it just felt right. You know, I wanted to scale up because I knew that, you know, these little teeny weavings, I'm thinking, oh, they're going to get sort of lost in a gallery. And I was thinking of ways to change the scale. And anyway, I just really appreciate your comments.
Sorry.
I'm not
Inga,
hearing Solange. You're muted, I think.
Inga has a question, and then Naji.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. And I
Okay.
can see you too.
I'm up to 3 questions, but 2 are like superficial quickies. I'll put them all out there and you can answer at your will. One was about the paint, and I'm just like curious if I can't remember if you mentioned if you're using oil or acrylic, but I think, did you say you're mixing some of your own paint?
I have mixed some of I have made paint. I started making paint back when Jack Whitten was my, 3rd year painting professor. He got me into that. So that's decades ago. That's a long time ago. And I've made paints on and off ever since, but no, I didn't. I wish I had made all these paints. There's just so much labor in the dyeing, and there's just so many steps, laborious steps, that I took a shortcut to the art supply store, and I'm using oil paint.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I'm also just curious to hear about why the painting and the weaving didn't work, just like for my own curiosity.
It might simply be that I haven't explored it enough. I mean, sometimes you just have to stick with something long enough to really kind of make it work. I guess the first time I painted on top of a weaving, it just went from bad to worse, which could be interesting. Like it's something that I'm not. It's like something that's like sort of like, okay, I don't want to be in 500 directions. It's an interesting thing that I probably will pick up on at some point, because it just seems like obvious, like I should. But it's just something I have not explored to the extent that I can show it, or came up with any results that are worthy of showing.
My real question that's like a deeper dive is that I'm just noticing there's this, I think it's kind of similar to what Fabienne was saying. There's a tension between the interiors and the exteriors, with like the dye being like sourced from outside, but the fabric is sourced from inside. And the gallery just really lent itself to your work, and that you could see the trees. So it's like an echo. So it makes me wonder how the work would be different displayed outside, or if that's something you considered. And also, I really thought it was exciting to see it in your home space, because it really related to your home space, because that's where the material is from. So
yeah, I would love to do work outside. That's definitely one of those frontiers I want to explore. And also something that deconstruction is something I haven't, things all have this cycle, this lifespan. So I've only been dyeing and weaving for, 3-4 years now. And I'm using really the classic, super light, fast. I mean, there are items. There was somebody put on my Facebook, wall, a sock that they had discovered that was like 1400 years old. And it was like vibrant, like garishly striped colors. And when I looked at, and it was basically woad, weld, and matter in different combinations. For example, weld gives you a yellow. So if you dye something with weld and then you over dye it with woad, you get a green. Which is Kelly green, which is supposedly the green that Robin Hood, is associated with, and so on. So I'm using these. It's kind of ironic, because one of the things people say is, oh, natural dyes, they just assume they're less light fast than the chemical dyes. So far, the natural dyes I've used, if they're applied properly And there's a lot of prep work that goes into the applied properly. I actually mentioned the scouring and, the mordanting. I realized at one point that I was using the wrong kind of mordant, and I had, and that's why the matter looked on that sheet looked kind of like pink instead of red. So what I did was I overdyed it with yellow and got an orange. And so it's some of that orange cord you're seeing like here. This is some of the cord that was like on the wash line in that 2019 exhibition. That was like that orange here was madder, and pink like that sheet. And this may even be part of that sheet for all I know. And then it was overdyed with a yellow. And that was dyed a few years ago, and it's not any less vibrant than it was a few years ago. But what if I subject that? What if I put it on the beach, and then part of the weaving is exposed to the sun and parts that are sort of more interior or not. And there's so many places this project kind of has to go. And I've thought of a lot of them, but I have to press the slow down Cindy button so that I don't make myself crazy trying to, do them all tomorrow. But there's some, that's definitely a really exciting possibility of doing the work outdoors, but also what happens when the work is outdoors for a length of time in a space. And how do people respond to it, and what physically happens to it? I find all of that very interesting.
Many paths to come. The last thing I'll say is that, are you familiar with Helen O'Leary?
No.
Not her work looks very different, but the process and thought behind it is similar. I'll put it in the chat. So
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. I hope I answered your question. I got kind of lost, walking down my own verbal path that meanders aimlessly. I may or may not have answered that question. Sorry.
And then Naji.
Hi, I am so excited fascinated by this loom that you built in the space. I am also like a kind of a weaver person. And so my question is kind of nerdy. I just want to know more about your process in building the loom, why you picked this particular kind of loom, etc. Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. I am kind of shocked that it works because I have never built a warp weighted or even worked on or even seen in person a warp weighted loom. I'm a total idiot here. And what I just read about it, I literally, I was reading this book by Elizabeth Whalen Barber, which is just so highly recommended. If you're a weavy person, you gotta read this book. She is really scholarly and really funny. This is actually a scan of my copy of the book, and you can see I've highlighted, apparently women were already expected to work long hours because they placed the warp weighted loom where you could not only get the sunlight in the day, but the firelight at night. And if you look at this one on the right-hand side, it's actually they would sometimes use the rafters of the build, of their home, like a home in Neolithic days was like one room with a hearth in the middle. And I was just really drawn, what I'm doing is super primitive. I'm like a cave person weaver, and to me it's very funny. And I think I forget who mentioned it. I'm taking this fast fashion waist, and then I'm, going back to some of the most primitive techniques possible. Actually, Leslie Wren, who's one of my cohort, showed me how to make cord. And one of the techs in the fiber department at MICA showed me how to make t-shirt yarn. And it's super easy. T-shirts, if you have like a discarded t-shirt, you can just cut it in strips and pull it is the basic technique. There's little, and you can YouTube it. That's what I did. I learned how to spin wool by YouTubing. I had to refresh myself how to make t-shirt yarn by YouTubing. So I don't have the mother or the grandmother. There's this big break in tradition where I'm this sort of person, stranded in the 21st century that doesn't have any of these skills. And so I think I associate or identify sort of with people discovering this in the first place. If I wanted fabric that was all even and perfect, it would be so much easier to go out and buy it. But the properties that happen when you are working with these primitive wonky materials and natural dyes that, the pH in this particular location was different than that location, or I picked the goldenrod in the morning instead of the afternoon, or I picked it in August instead of September. All of that is going to impact the color you get, how the temperature in the dye pot, how long you left it in, and on and on and on. So to me, as I guess with my background as a painter, I see that the natural dyes are like building a palette, right? So I'm looking at my, my cord and going, oh, I don't have any blues in there. Thank heavens, Marla grew woad because that's a blue. And so, I have an old pair of blue jeans. Well, there's blue. But yeah, so like I look at what I have and then think, what do I want to make, or what colors am I missing? And I got a lot of like weird colors. Let me go. I mean, I'm not a beige person. If you think medieval stained glass, then my kind of taste when it comes to color. Sorry, I'm just looking for a particular slide to land on. Anyway, but actually, yeah, this would be like this kind of like iron gray and beige and like this kind of color. Like, what even is that color? Like if somebody had a shirt in that color, I wouldn't buy it, but like in the context of this weaving, it makes this, it interacts with the other colors and just sort of gives me a bigger palette. So yeah, so if I can do it, you can do it. It's amazing that the one thing that did work in my favor is that because I was able to make loom weights, I actually made them. This is my loom, like a close up of my loom weight here. Let me get the one further down where you see them at the bottom. Yeah, here's a good one. So you'll notice these are like at different levels. That's because some of the cord has more stretch than others. And so because the weight of the loom weights is the same, if it's more stretchy, the loom weight will end up further down. Really simple. And so if you just sort of like, if you go up higher on the loom and just sort of run your hand, like there's a pole at the top and then there's this pole at the bottom. And in between those two poles, the tension on the warp threads is just like absolutely perfect. It's like not so tight that you have trouble weaving it, and it's not so loose that it's just all over the place. It provides just enough tension to allow you to work. So in sort of historical loom weights, they had a almost like a take-up reel, like a roller at the top. And they would actually, they didn't do it this way where they slide through. They would actually tie the warp threads to the bottom. You can see on the illustration on the left, it's kind of easier to see. The loom weights that they used in Greece were triangular, mostly. And then they would tie the warps. And of course, they were using threads, not these like hunkin' cords that I'm using, you know. So generally speaking, the finer the thread, the more threads go into a particular, like a single loom weight. So they would put bunches of this, and then they have, you know, so in a more traditional, that this bar here is like my bamboo bar that's closer to the bottom, but because I'm sliding my loom weights through the hole rather than tying them, I don't need that, you know, like I'm not getting that thing where they're bunching together at the bottom. It's just really, you know, I was thinking of doing a warp weighted loom 2 years ago. I was going to do one in the library here at ESU, and we were going to just get a pole, and, you know, this is a pre-COVID idea, right? That, you know, students would come in and they would like bring cast off clothing that nobody wanted, and, you know, it would be like a community thing. But yeah, then there was 2020. But I actually didn't know what I was making this loom out of until we pruned our trees. The professional tree cutters wanted over $1,000, and, you know, I roped my husband basically into doing it. Like, I started doing it and it was kind of disastrous, and then he came in and rescued me, kind of like a knight in shining armor, but that's another story.
And let's see, it looks like there's one more question from Leah.
Hi, Leah, where are you?
I'm here. Hi, Cindy. Congratulations. Mine is a little bit different. It's not really a technical question necessarily, but you've mentioned the idea of lifespans as well as cycles, and I'm interested in two things. One is how you see those as the same or different, and how that plays out in your work. And then, as you were talking to Najee about the goldenrods and how you pick them at different points in the day or different times of the year, it brought me back to a question I had when you were reading your artist statement about how you see yourself. You said, you know, your relation to cycles. I was wondering how you see yourself as a person within that cycle, like when you pick the goldenrods and things, or if that is playing out in your work in any way.
Oh, it's definitely playing out in my work. That's such an excellent question that I don't know how well I'm going to answer it at this point. It's something that I'll like listen to the recording, and hopefully I'll have a more coherent expression eventually. I'm kind of open to what's going on. You know, for example, I was originally thinking of using like bamboo or maybe even lumber to make the warp weighted loom. But when we pruned our trees, I was like, oh my gosh, look at that wood, you know? So part of this cycling is that you have to be open to these things that are not the cliche. So most people, when they prune their branches in Easton, we have a community compost. So you can take it down to the recycling center And, you know, there's a big like area that, you know, you can bring your leaves and stuff like that. So most people would have just like literally thrown it away. But I saw it as like something that I could use. I can't use every single thing. It's not like I don't have any waste. I do. I wish I could have less. But I see myself as intervening with, you know, like observation, imagination, and manipulation to try and sort of to not make that cycle a dead end, to, you know, to sort of keep it going. When, you know, before I, you know, started this project, I would keep, you know, when sheets were worn out, I thought of them as like rags, right? Like I could use it as a rag when I'm cleaning. Well, when I started this project, I had about 3 like gigundo garbage bag size, you know, full of like rags basically. And I don't need that many rags. I don't clean that much that I need that many rags, you know? So it's interesting. Like if you look at the, let's see if I can find the one where you see the stuff that's next to the loom. Yeah. So the interesting thing, this little circular box here, for like over a year, I could never make more cord or yarn that would fit in that box. Because what would happen is I'd start weaving with it, and then it would like, so there was this whole like sort of like progression where it would go from the rag bag, and then it gets, you know, it gets prepped and it gets dyed and it gets made into cord, and then it gets woven. And so, you know, oh, my box is empty, I guess I need to make more cord. And, you know, I would love the, you know, time to actually have less possessions and to sort of repurpose, reuse, get rid of in a way that is, you know, ecologically responsible and puts them to use with somebody else or whatever. But yeah, I would love to, as a person on the planet, I would love to have like a lesser impact than I have. So these, I don't know if that, like, again, I think this is like a terrible answer to a really good question. Are there, did that even begin to answer it?
Thank you, Cindy. I feel like it was a question that extended probably beyond just this work that we're discussing tonight. So
Yeah. I get maybe something to bring in is that, you know, I got hit by a car in 1982. And, you know, when things like, I can honestly say that reports of my death have been exaggerated. At the age of 5, I was reported dead in a fire. I was in the house when it was on fire, I just didn't die. My house was struck by lightning twice. You know, I could have died many times in my life, except for, you know, medical intervention. So even from a young age, I think I had a sense of, you know, the finiteness of our life here, but also as a Christian, I have a sense of our personhood living on and not just, you know, sort of being thrown away at the end. And so I think, you know, I'm trying to think about both of these things in this project. I think we live in a very youth-centered culture where it's like people don't want to admit that they're going to get old and die. You know, that's taboo. But, you know, a few years ago, I was looking at the possibility of potentially losing my foot. And, you know, as another repercussion, I had necrosis of the ankle bone, no blood supply. My bone was fractured and demineralizing, and without a blood supply, there was no way it could recover. I was really blessed by being able to get a vascularized bone transplant, what I lovingly refer to as my Frankenstein surgery, where they took part of my leg and put it into my ankle bone. So I guess I'm kind of aware that, you know, ability isn't something that I'll always have. I've lost it in the back, you know, like the ability to walk. I've lost many times. In my life, I think I've been on crutches for at least 2 years. If you put all the times I was on crutches or a cane, like, or a brace together, it would be like years of my life.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting when you were telling that story is I thought back to when you were discussing the river, and you discussed it twice this way about where it starts and where it ends. And I kept thinking, well, it doesn't end. I mean, that form of it ends and then it becomes something else. So that's just
Exactly.
So-
Exactly. That's, yeah.
So-
It,
once again, this is, I think we're rolling on. So
I'm sorry. But I'm well, I like that I mean, it supposedly ends, but it doesn't. The same way that as a Christian, I don't believe my life ends when they, you know, do whatever they do with me when I die.
thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Cindy, for your first thesis talk to the group. Congratulations. Sorry that none of us could see the show, right, in C2, but you took us on a wonderful journey with the show and your ideas. Thanks.
Thank you so much. You're very kind. Thank you all. I've had a lot of help from a lot of people and I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. So we will now take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back for Matilda's presentation, okay? Big congratulations.